minimum wage. Yeah!
What's up, True Seekers? Welcome back. Stoked to be here with you. I want to talk about something that I hate. You know what really grinds my gears? The minimum wage. Let's be honest. People who support the minimum wage are retarded if they don't know that much about it. If they do, they're way worse. There's something that ends with ism. I want to explain why today. And before I do, apologize for my voice. There's something really cool about getting my annual viral infection in my throat. I totally lose my voice for like a week. And when it's going and what comes back, I get this really deep, throaty thing. Some girl at my work's like, "You're talking really manly." Thank you. Thank you very much. I can do voices that I can't usually do. I like doing voices when my voice isn't bad, but I can do some that are effortless when it loses, like Diedrich Bader, better known as Rex Kwon Do. "You think people think I'm a failure because I go home with Starlight Night? Forget about it. Now bow to your sensei. Bow to your sensei." Yeah, there's other ones too, like Morpheus from The Matrix. "I can only open the door. You're the one that has to walk through." You know, that actually sounds kind of like Varicose. You remember Jim Carrey from In Living Color when he did I guess he was a tranny back then, the tranny warrior. He was like, "I can't believe you just did that." So anyway, there's others too, but we get a big kick out of it because I can only do them once a year because my voice isn't that deep. Anyway, going back to the point, I was talking to someone who's a friend of mine who otherwise is very intelligent. And she said, "Did you see all the stuff about the minimum wage? Can't believe it. Red Robin's firing all these people. I mean, they had platers and they're gone. And now the bus boys are gone. And they're just, who's going to be next? It's crazy. They're just trying to make a livable wage." And I went, oh, face. Okay. Wait, what? What? She goes, "I just think the company's being greedy. I mean, they could just pay them a little more, right?" So when you hear this, again, smart people who just don't know simple things. When you hear this, make sure to ask the question, "Hey, I got a question about the minimum wage." Well, I got two questions. One, what is the true minimum wage? What do you mean? Like, what is true minimum wage? What's the actual minimum wage? Here, $11. Well, in Seattle, it's 14. It depends on the state. Depends on the. No. It's zero. The true minimum wage is zero. And all these poor saps at Red Robin who were earning a livable wage or were $1 away from earning a livable wage at Red Mountain have just learned that immutable fact that when the company has to eliminate your job to make sure that it can meet its profitability mandates, you earn the true minimum wage, which is zero. More people in the last year of Obama's administration were earning this than ever before in the history of America because of the labor force participation rate. True minimum wage, zero. The arbitrary one set by the government or whatever board doesn't take into account all the little nuances and economic realities of running a business. They're too far removed from it to be able to make these decisions wisely. And as a result, people lose their jobs. So when we had this conversation, this friend of mine said, "Well," and I said, "Before you say anything, second question, what happens if there is no minimum wage, if it doesn't exist?" And of course, because history starts the day you're born, she hadn't considered that maybe we didn't have minimum wage at one point. She said, "Well, then how would companies know what to pay their people?" I said, "Okay, if you have a garage sale, how would you know what to sell things for? Do you need to call the government, get permission before you sell anything?" Because that's what happens with wage fixing. We don't allow price fixing. We don't allow other types of fixing, but wage fixing, we actually mandate by the government. So anyway, if you saw the article about Red Robin, I haven't been there in years, actually. I'm not a huge fan of the Robin, but it's got some pretty dire stats about what's going to happen to these people who are going to lose their jobs. Michael Saltzman, director of the Employment Policies Institute, he must be smart, said these cutbacks are a direct result of the minimum wage increase. So minimum wage results in cutbacks. Okay, well, he's probably just a greedy capitalist. He told Fox Business if they can't pass those increases off in higher prices, they have to find a way to do more with less. He added the minimum wage hikes are directly impacting entry-level opportunities. What are platers and what are busboys? Entry-level opportunities. People who need those jobs and they need the experience just as much as they need the money, because without them, they'll never make more money. It's just the fact of the matter. The opportunities as companies looking for cost-saving measures are targeting those positions first. Food, service, and retail employees tend to be most affected by such hikes. If you recall, in Seattle, they were passed a $15 an hour minimum wage law, and it cost the city jobs and lowered incomes. I've got some numbers on this. Check it out. I'll link to all these articles below if you want to read them, but there was a study from the team of researchers at the University of Washington on Seattle's University of Washington on Seattle. It's catchy. $15 an hour minimum wage. They reported, emphasis added, you need to know that. Our preferred estimates suggest that the minimum wage in Seattle ordinance caused hours worked by low-skilled workers, i.e. those earning under $19 an hour, that's $38,000 a year for you guys that are math whizzes, to fall by 9.4% during the 3 quarters when the minimum wage was $13 an hour, resulting in a loss of 3.5 million hours worked per calendar quarter. Productivity. Alternative estimates show that the number of low-wage jobs declined by 6.8%, which represents a loss of more than 5,000 jobs. I read somewhere recently that I don't have open here that like 30% of Seattle's restaurant chains and fast food, etc. type businesses kick the can. Why would you pass a law where you're going to lose 30% of your small businesses? I mean, who's going to hire these people? Who's paying these people's living wage? The work of least paid workers might be performed more efficiently by more skilled and experienced workers commanding a substantially higher wage. Now, that may be true, but you have the option to pay less for lower skill if you think your business can risk it and let them work up and prove that they can handle higher skilled positions. But you're taking this opportunity away when the government passes a minimum wage because you're pricing them out of the labor market. Now, in the AEI, it quotes Thomas Sowell, who says that the economic reality is that workers compete against other workers, not employers, to find jobs and get the highest wages. Employers compete against other employers to find the best workers, which means labor is a what? It's a commodity, just like any other commodity you buy. When you go on Amazon, the government doesn't have to tell you what you should pay for the things that you want. You see the price and you decide if it's worth it for you to separate yourself from your hard-earned money in exchange for whatever good, service, or commodity that you want. Whereas the vendor lists the product for the price he thinks it's worth for him to sell it based on how much it costs for him to acquire it, build it, market it, sell it, etc. It's just like labor. I come to the employer with a skill and a work ethic, and they come to me with an offer of how much they need to make. So my answer, my friend, is why does anyone need to tell anyone what to pay? It's up to them. And for those who are conservative, libertarian, originalist, constitutionalists like me, it's called freedom of association. We don't need someone to tell us what we think is a good deal. If there are two people who want to enter into it, whether that's a business transaction or a marriage or anything else, we can do that, provided it's in both of our best interest and we're not infringing on anyone else's law or redefining the definition of said transaction. Now, continuing. In other words, low-skilled workers compete against high-skilled workers in the labor market. Low-skilled workers who would be employable at a low wage become unemployable at an artificially high wage. Hello, Red Robin. And that explains the perverse cruelty of minimum wage laws. It inflicts the greatest harm on the very workers it is allegedly designed to help. So the question becomes, why would you support legislation that's cruel to the people who need help the most? Why would you do that? That kind of makes you a bad person if you understand what the effect of this law is. Don't be a bad person. So, when do you think it was? Any guesses? Do you have any idea when the federal wage started? Was it part of the Constitution? Did the founding fathers argue that everyone should be mandated a minimum floor for wages based on whatever we thought was fair or true at the time? Nope, didn't happen. The last time we had a minimum wage was in the battle days before there was a federal minimum wage law. I'm going to take this from a Thomas Sowell article where he says the annual unemployment rate during Calvin Coolidge's last 4 years as president ranged from a high of 4.2% to a low of 1.8%. 1.8% unemployment. That's when we needed a federal minimum wage. Now keep this in mind. He makes a great point. I got tons and tons of notes on this stuff because people just don't know it. The last year, and this is why I think the minimum wage laws are racist, and I'll make this case in a second. The last year when the black unemployment rate was lower than the white unemployment rate was 1930. The last year, coincidentally, before there was a federal minimum wage law. Would you say that this law disproportionately affected blacks? I would, based on the data, but was it an accident? I don't know. He goes on to say the following year, the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931 was passed, requiring minimum wages in the construction industry. Okay. This is in response to complaints that construction companies with non-union black construction workers were able to underbid construction companies with unionized white workers whose unions would not admit blacks. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I have said in many conversations, the purpose of the minimum wage law was to protect the establishment, was to protect jobs for white people against undesirable minorities, deplorables, women, predominantly blacks. So if that was why it was done, did it accomplish its purpose? Per the statistic, black unemployment's always been higher than whites since that act was passed. The unemployment rate for 16 and 17-year-old blacks in 1948 was under 10%. Inflation had made minimum wage laws irrelevant, but it was only a matter of time before liberal compassion, progressive compassion, led to repeated increases in the minimum wage to keep up with inflation. The annual unemployment rate for black teenagers has never been less than 20% in the past 50 years, and it's gone as high as 50%. He recommends a book which I've read, which I absolutely think is fantastic, called Race and Economics by Professor Walter Williams, and then goes on to say that the black and white gap in unemployment rates for 16 and 17-year-olds was virtually non-existent in 1948, but it's since more than doubled for white teenagers. But the black teenage unemployment rate has been more than double that for white teenagers for every year since 1971. Thank you, politicians, and thank you, Davis-Bacon Act of 1931, for keeping black people out of work. What would we have done without you? Now, to say it was their intention to do that, I don't know, but that's what it did. So my question to people who support the minimum wage now is, if you know this law was a racist law to keep black people out of work when all they wanted to do was offer services that white union workers were offering for a lower price, why can't they do that? What's the big problem? And this is the real question for me in terms of labor. If you go on Amazon and two people are charging different things, which one do you buy if they're the exact same? Probably the cheaper one. Shouldn't you be able to do that with labor? Should you be able to go to two restaurants where they serve the same thing and one's cheaper than the other? Should you be able to go on Amazon and buy the cheaper product? Should you be able to go anywhere and buy something that's exactly the same for a lower price? You practice that in your daily life, but you don't preach it when you advocate for the minimum wage law. You say that two people offering the same service should not be able to charge the same price. The government should increase the price, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, you live here in Phoenix, you can go down the street and you can hire construction workers for $5, $6, $7, $8 an hour, whatever you want, and they'll do work for you. It's called the black market economy, and there are people doing those jobs, most of them illegal Mexican immigrants. Now, they don't have the right to work, but they aren't punished as much as the companies who hire them because the government has more of a stake in protecting the minimum wage than they do of making sure those people can feed their families. Where you stand on this, I don't know, but I become very confused when I hear the rhetoric on this about what the priority is. If you're going to care for illegals that much and not let anyone hire them, that's a conversation for a different day. There's one more article I want to show you here. It's from another Thomas Sowell article where he argues that when you turn from economic principles to hard facts, the case against minimum wage laws is even stronger. Countries with minimum wage laws almost invariably have higher rates of unemployment than countries without minimum wage laws. Most nations today have minimum wage laws, but they have not always had them. Unemployment rates have been very much lower in places where there are no minimum wage laws. His example is Switzerland, one of the few modern nations without a minimum wage. In 2003, The Economist reported that Switzerland's unemployment rate neared a 5-year high of 3.9% in February. By the way, this is back when the Bush years, when our unemployment rate, we were complaining and screaming about how high it was at 5%. In February of this year, Switzerland's unemployment rate was 3.1%. This is 2013 during the Obama economy when ours was quite a bit higher. A recent issue of The Economist showed Switzerland's unemployment rate as 2.1%. Most Americans have never seen unemployment rates that low. However, there was a time when there was no federal minimum wage law in the United States. During the Coolidge administration, as I mentioned, 1.8%. When Hong Kong was a British colony, it had no minimum wage, and in 1991, its unemployment rate was under 2%. So let's compare and contrast this with examples of countries who are even worse than we are when it comes to their minimum wage laws, especially those in Europe. Spain and Greece, for example. South Africa is another good example, but they rate at the bottom. Just look down the unemployment column for countries with unemployment rates above or around 25%. Spain, Greece, and South Africa are always there, whether or not there is a recession. Why? Because they have very generous minimum wage laws. It appears that when you let a free market, and more importantly, a free nation with free people do what they like, the unemployment rate goes down. When you decide, like in Seattle, that people can't live without doing an entry-level job and making $15 an hour because they have very, very generous minimum wage laws, which result in those people earning what? The true
minimum wage. Yeah!
Don't be fooled by minimum wage. It was started to hurt blacks, started to hurt women. And the question I have for you is, if that's what its original purpose was, and now it's not sold that way, now it's marketed as helping people on a livable wage, what's changed about minimum wage? Has the nature of the thing changed, or the slick marketing practices to get people to fall for it when they won't buy the original reason anymore? They would recoil from hearing, keep blacks and women out of the marketplace. Now the marketing message is, you got to earn a livable wage, doing entry-level work. Which one's true, which one's false? If it still does what it was designed to do because the nature of minimum wage laws has not changed, then you're an idiot for supporting it. The true minimum wage is 0. If you're feeling like you need a friend, someone you want to support, someone you want to get close to, someone you want to get to know a little better, someone you want to have a relationship with, why not do it with me? Oh, hell yeah. It's on Patreon. I put all my notes, all my prep, all my hard sweat labor that I put into making these videos. It's all there, baby. And it's all for you. Why am I doing it? Well, because I want to share it with you. And because YouTube's probably shadow banning me. Same with Twitter and all the rest. And we don't like that, do we? Check out Patreon. I'll be there, waiting.